quite late. It's almost 10 minutes late. Sorry about that. I was actually narrating an audiobook and I just didn't want to leave it sort of halfway through. Went on a little bit longer than I thought it would. Good to see so many members here. SM Kowalinsky, Amy Hall, Nisi, Yoga, and I see you change your name almost every time that we see you. Yvonne Phillips, Sharon Lynn, also good to see you. Stephanie, it's good to see you here as well. Pete, Paddy, Robbie Robin. Have I missed anyone? Terry Dean, I think, was here and has had some other commitment. I think that's just about everyone. Have I missed anyone? I think that's everyone. So yeah, good to have you here. SM Kowalinsky, good to see you here as well. I think I mentioned you, didn't I? So we're gonna go back in time. We are kind of like time travelers. When we last dealt with the Van Gogh saga, we were at the sort of end of July 1890. And now we're going to go back in time 18 years, almost exactly 18 years. We're going to go to August 1872, which is when Van Gogh was 19 years old. So he was a teenager. He had his whole life in front of him. And he wasn't actually an artist. He wasn't trying to be an artist. He wasn't interested in art as an artist. He was interested. He was selling art. So he was already, although he was only 19 years old, he was already employed, and he was working for Goupil Cie in the Netherlands, and he would later be transferred to London. And so the first series of letters we're dealing with deals with the letters he wrote while he was employed by Goupil Cie in Den Haag, that's The Hague, which is by train, it's maybe a little bit less than an hour from Amsterdam. It's directly south of Amsterdam. And so it's quite close to Amsterdam. It's also kind of on the way to Paris, if you carried on in that direction. In fact, when I traveled from Auvers, I traveled by train to Amsterdam. So from Paris to Amsterdam by train. What else can I tell you? So he's 19 years old, he's working, and he's now writing to his brother. This is the first letter we have on record, writing to his brother, and his brother at this point is still going to school. And so here you have a totally different dynamic in terms of their relationship. Here it is the older brother kind of taking care of the younger brother. Here it is the older brother who has a job, who is not at school anymore, doing his thing and giving his younger brother advice. And how much can change in 18 years? How much can those roles change in terms of one sibling looking out for the other, right? And so you're going to feel as we go back in time, 18 years, that suddenly we are back. Vincent is alive again. We're back inside the timeline of his life. And it's quite, in a way, disorientating to think that at this point he's not even interested in painting. His attitude is totally different. Who he is and who he's going to become is still forming, and yet in another way, the Vincent that we know and the Vincent that we encounter here are also kind of the same person in a sense. That identity is still there, but there are also certain things that are in flux about this character. Paddy says, how fortunate for us that Vincent van Gogh was such a prolific letter writer. Well, I don't know if you know this, but, in terms of Vincent van Gogh's letters, I think there's something like 900 letters or something. Well, Casey Anthony wrote something like 500 letters while she was in jail. So if you guys are interested, we could also potentially do a series on that. Casey's jailhouse letters. Whether it's going to be as interesting is a matter of debate, but might be. Stephanie says, how old was he when he wrote the letter we're discussing today? Well, he was 19 years old. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get started. And this is a letter written from Vincent to his brother Theo from The Hague. That's Den Haag. I think it's also the seat of the International Criminal Court. The Hague, August 1872, and I've actually been there myself. I was the guest of someone who edited a lot of my work, and of her and her husband, and also met some of the other family. And she took me to see Vermeer and chaperoned me to Noonan, and we also went to the Krollemoller Gallery, and so quite pretty interesting. So let's get started. Vincent writes, Dear Theo, many thanks for your letter. So this is actually a reply to Theo's letter. He said, I was glad to hear you arrived home safely. I missed you the first few days, and it felt strange not to find you there when I came home in the afternoons. We have had some enjoyable days together and managed to take a few walks and see one or two sights between the spots of rain. What dreadful weather. You must have sweltered from the heat on your walks to Oosterwijk. There was harness racing yesterday for the exhibition, but the illuminations and the fireworks were put off because of the bad weather, so it's just as well you didn't stay on to see them. Regards from the Hanebeek and Roos families. Always your loving Vincent. So at this time, Vincent van Gogh was 19 years old. He signs his letters, Your Loving Vincent, and this is where the movie, the animated movie, got its title from, Loving Vincent. In his later letters, he didn't write sort of Loving Vincent or something like that. He just wrote With a Handshake or something like that, right? So kind of what they're talking about here is the weather, but he's kind of looking out for his brothers, saying, you must have sweltered from the heat. This is August, late summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and pretty hot for them. And he's talking about harness racing. He's talking about fireworks that were put off because of this bad weather. And I think the fireworks were, if it's the same place I'm thinking of, there's a beautiful sort of, looks like a castle, and then it's surrounded by water. It's sort of kind of the main municipal building in The Hague. It's kind of in the center. And I think the fireworks go off around there. But it's quite amazing to think that 100 years ago, that they had fireworks. Fireworks seems like something that's not modern, but apparently it's pretty quite an ancient entertainment. He also talks about illumination. So one wonders, what was that? How did they, it wasn't only fireworks, it was also whatever those illuminations were. And of course, jump forward to the present, and there are these immersive exhibitions today, which are, one could describe in one word as illuminations, walking inside these illuminated artworks. So it's quite interesting what was part of the fabric of his day at that point. You can also see there's quite a strong family bond here between the brothers, where he says, I missed you the first few days. It felt strange not to find you there when I came home in the afternoons. Now, just think about those words and the context that we've just left, where his brother was sitting at his bedside, and how his brother must have felt strange not to find letters from him anymore, and not to have artwork sent from him or painting orders. Remember, he was getting them virtually every day for years and years and years, and suddenly that would have stopped as well. So he also would have missed these, and felt strange not to find, regular letters from Vincent. So that is Stephanie says, I'm going to Vincent's exhibit here in July. That's awesome. Well, I hope you're going to take some photos and maybe even record some video and share it with us. And maybe I can cobble it together in a video. So are you guys ready to get on to the next letter? Sounds good, Stephanie. So just so you guys know, this live stream is going to deal with all the letters he wrote from The Hague, and there's something like, I think there may be 9 or 10 letters. Then, and that deals with this period, right? Then he moves on to London, and I think he's there for something like maybe 2 years. I'm not quite sure, but I think there's a crap load of letters from London. So I don't know if we'll be able to deal with all those letters in one live stream. But basically, we're going to separate live streams in terms of periods. This period, we're dealing with The Hague. We'll see how long it takes. Yvonne says fireworks can be traced all the way back to ancient China. Yeah. Okay, so we are now jumping from August to about 2 weeks before Christmas in that same year. By the way, 1872 is the year that I was born. And so when this letter was written was a couple of months before I was born. And so, you know, we're really going back kind of 150 years, aren't we, to 1872. And so this letter was written from Vincent to Theo, 13th of December, 1872. It's quite interesting that we don't have Theo's letters. So obviously Theo kept Vincent's letters. It feels like Vincent didn't keep Theo's letters, or we just don't know what happened to them. So anyway, Vincent writes the following. Dear Theo, what good news I've just read in Father's letter. I wish you luck with all my heart. I'm sure you will like it there. It's such a fine firm. It will be quite a change for you. So what he's actually talking about there is his brother, who I think at this point was 16 years old. His brother's just gotten a job at the same firm that he's working at, right? I think, I could be wrong. He says, I'm so glad that both of us are now to be in the same profession and in the same firm. Now, obviously, looking at this in terms of hindsight is, oh, Yvonne, sorry to see you go. Take care. Sharon Lynn says, Marie Antoinette also loved fireworks. So what's also quite interesting is to look at, in hindsight, Vincent went into this job first, then he dropped out of it. But before he dropped out of it, his brother kind of followed in his footsteps, but his brother stayed in it all along, and then he kind of became dependent on his brother's connections. And the irony is, despite his brother's connections, he never really made it as an artist during his own lifetime. So despite the fact that his brother was an art dealer, had these connections, he still wasn't really successful, which is kind of weird. Anyway, he says, I'm so glad that both of us are now to be in the same profession, art dealers, and in the same firm. That's Goupil Cie. We must be sure to write to each other regularly, and obviously they did. He says, I hope that I'll see you before you leave. We still have a lot to talk about. I believe that Brussels is a very pleasant city, but it's bound to feel strange for you in the beginning. So it sounds like his brother is bound for Brussels. His brother is going to be in Brussels, whereas Brussels is in Belgium. He is in Den Haag and will then leave the country completely to go to London. And that's going to be an incredible experience for him, because at that time, I don't know if you know this, at that time, the sort of fairly late 19th century, London was the world's biggest city, right? A little bit like what New York is today. I'm not saying New York is the world's biggest city, but it's one of the major cities in the world. But London sort of stood apart as the world's biggest city in that time. And so you can imagine what it felt like to go from little cities, little places in the Netherlands to this bustling city. You know, all of us are kind of familiar with cities. all of us have been to numerous cities. I've been to Paris, I've been to London, I've been to Seoul in South Korea, I've been to Kuala Lumpur, and in a way, big cities are similar to one another. There's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of people, obviously, but there's also things that you kind of can sometimes be unfamiliar with: pollution, crime, poverty, all that kind of thing. That sense of claustrophobia, that sense of both something being awesome and something being very intimidating, that sense of being lost and that sense of kind of opportunity, right? But think of it like, in a weird way, we are modern city slickers. When you go to one city, there's the, public transport, there is this and that and the next thing, and now you can use your phone. In that time, it's like cars are coming online. Things like street lighting is coming online. And for us, things like lights and television and the internet is all absolutely normal. But can you imagine the transition from not having lights, not having electricity, to, lights coming on the street? Can you imagine the transition from transport on boats and on sort of horse-drawn carriages to motorized transport? I'm not saying that was necessarily going on in Vincent's life. It was starting to happen. I'm just saying the change, the transition that was happening was pretty major. Anyway, so he goes on to say, it's bound to feel strange for you in the beginning, no doubt. So another thing just to bear in mind is the Eiffel Tower was also being built at the time that Van Gogh died. So that gives you a sense that engineering, like major engineering, was happening at the time that Vincent van Gogh was alive. I just want to have a look at the Titanic. When was that built? 1912. So the Titanic is a little bit after this time, but I mean, you can kind of see that a lot is going on in the machinery of the world at this time, that the sort of the late 19th century. And this machinery of the world would then manifest in war, the First World War and the Second World War as well. So although there were positive aspects to it, there were also extremely negative aspects. This industrialization process, this assembly line scenario, which is just coming into its own. So we kind of get a view almost of the prelude to the world going into this phase through Vincent van Gogh's life. It's almost like innocence lost in a way. So he says, it's bound to feel strange for you in the beginning. Write to me soon in any case. Well, goodbye for now. This is just a brief note dashed off in haste. But I had to tell you how delighted I am at the news. Best wishes, and believe me always, your loving brother, Vincent. And then he writes as a postscript here, I don't envy you having to walk to Oosterwijk every day in this awful weather. Regards from the Roos family. It's quite weird. This is now a total change in seasons from summer to winter. It's now just before Christmas. And you get the feeling that Theo is still walking to wherever he's going. And Vincent's saying to him, I don't envy your commute. I feel sorry for you, kind of thing, right? Okay, so now we're going to go to, by the way, the source I'm using for these letters is, I think I should actually provide it to you, webexhibits.org. Let me put a link to that in the description. If you guys want to read these yourselves, you're welcome to, but that's one source that I'm using. Now we're going to go to a third letter. This was written about a month later, January 1873. So we've got two letters from 1872, and now we've got this third letter. in this third letter, he actually gives his, I think it's a new address to write to. So anyway, he writes again from The Hague. My dear Theo, I heard from home that you arrived safe and sound at Brussels and that your first impression was good. I know so well how strange you must feel in the beginning, but don't lose courage. You'll get on all right. Now, I must say, when I went to The Hague, I got totally lost on my very last day there. Like, when I say totally lost, I think I was lost for about 5 or 6 hours. And I had my phone with me, but my phone wasn't set on mobile data. I think what I could have done if I was really desperate, and I was starting to get quite desperate, was I could have gone to a restaurant or something and asked to connect to their Wi-Fi and then figure out where I was. But I kept feeling like I was just around the corner from where I needed to be. And, when last were you completely lost for hours and hours and hours? So it was kind of a terrible experience. So anyway, there were definitely great, awesome moments, some lovely parks. The reason I actually got lost was I wanted to go to, I think it's called Sveven, what is it? I think I put it in a comment, the name of the place I was trying to get to. Not a comment, one of those Instagram posts. It might have been the second to last one. I'm quite sure how to say it. Is it? No, it's not that one. Is it the third last one? Okay, it's not that one. Let me guess it's going to be the first one. Okay, now it's asking me to log in. Okay. Anyway, I can't remember the name, but it's something like Svevenwegen or something like that. And it's like the coast. And I'd been there before, and it was quite straightforward, just go in this one direction. And the day that I wanted to, the last day I was in the Netherlands, the day before I was going to go back to South Africa, I wanted to make one last little trip to the coast, and I think there was a marathon on that day. There was like a marathon, and so you weren't allowed to go on certain routes, like roads were blocked. So I thought it was quite clever, and I was just like, oh, well, I'll just go one road in, but then it would be like a one-way or something like that. And that is actually how I ended up getting lost, was you kept being diverted, and then it's a one-way, and then eventually I lost my bearings. And although I found my way out to where I wanted to go, coming back, I definitely got totally lost. And the weird thing was that where I was trying to get to, there were signs saying that it's like 1 kilometer that way. So it was like, how far can I be from this place? But then there was like the old version of that place, and then also, anyway. So I kind of had also a pretty weird thing of being totally lost, even though how far was I even from where I needed to be? So he says, I know so well how strange you must feel in the beginning, but don't lose courage. You'll get on all right. You must soon write me how you are getting along and how you like your boarding house. I hope it will be satisfactory. Father wrote me that you are on good terms with Mr. Schmidt. That is right. I think he's a good fellow from whom you can learn a great deal. Now just look at the interesting kind of inversion here. I'm not saying that it's really a carbon copy of, Dr. Gachet or anything, but it's kind of like here you have the older brother sort of saying, you are in good hands with this dude, Mr. Schmidt. He'll take care of you. You know what I mean? And kind of giving him kind of a vote of confidence, saying, I think he's a good fellow, and you can learn a lot from this guy, right? So you kind of have this inversion here where Vincent's a younger brother, a younger man looking out for his younger brother, but also he's kind of leaving him with somebody else that is where he's effectively a protege kind of thing, if you know what I'm talking about. So it's kind of a weird inversion to the whole Auvergne thing. Anyway, then he says, what happy days we spent together at Christmas. So obviously this was quite an enjoyable time for the whole family, where Vincent himself was still in the good graces of his mother and his sisters. And I would imagine at this point, even Cor, his youngest brother, would have been there, Cor van Gogh. So this was like a moment where the Van Gogh family were happy. And I must say, when I went to the Wild Coast, that was where we went as a family on holidays as well. And that was when our family was a family of 5. Everyone was alive. Everyone was together. And it was kind of happy moments. And so when I go to the Wild Coast, that family fabric thing seems to come back to me, where I just remember that. So anyway, this is what he says. What happy days we spent together at Christmas. I think of them so often. You will also remember them a long time, as they were the last days you spent at home. So this is quite a momentous moment for Theo. He's kind of moving out of the family home permanently. He's becoming an adult. He's only 16 years old. And the irony is that Theo will move out of the family home. And thanks a lot, Yvonne. Appreciate that. Theo will move out of the family home, get a job, and sort of live happily ever after, right? Not for very long, but he will sort of kind of make a success of his life. He will maintain a fairly good relationship with his employers. He will meet a woman, fall in love, and have a child. And so he'll experience that spectrum of life, which in a way both of his other brothers don't really experience. I think Cor got divorced and Vincent never got married. If you compare that to Vincent moved out. The oldest brother moved out, but then he would later move back to his parents. And we're going to be dealing with Vincent moving back home in his letters, where he's at home and obviously kind of fallen from grace, and where he writes his brothers saying, things are pretty crap here. How's it going with you? Maybe I can come and see you, kind of thing. Anyway, so he says something about these are the last days you spent at home. Don't forget to tell me what pictures you see and which you like best. So it's quite interesting. I think here he's referring to artworks. What artworks are you coming across? Which ones do you recommend, right? Then he says, I am very busy just now at the beginning of the year. That's in terms of his work as an art dealer. Then he says, my new year began well. They have granted me an increase of 10 guilders. I therefore earn 50 guilders per month. And they have given me a bonus of 50 guilders as a present. Isn't that splendid? I hope to be able to shift for myself now. He says, I'm very happy that you work in the same firm. It is such a splendid house. The more one works there, the more ambition it gives you. The beginning is perhaps more difficult than anything else, but keep heart, it will turn out all right. Did you see how, you have the older brother encouraging the younger brother, saying, don't give up, don't be despondent, don't lose hope, just stay determined. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is we have this perception of Vincent as this sort of loser, this guy with no money, this guy who's unsuccessful. And meanwhile here, he's actually doing pretty well. He's just been given an increase. He's earning 50 guilders a month. They'd given him, I think he'd not only gotten an increase in terms of his salary, he'd also gotten a bonus. And so he says, isn't that splendid? And it is. He's certainly doing pretty well. And so you've kind of got to wonder in the back of your mind, what the heck went wrong here? He was doing really well. He was earning quite a lot of money. What happened that he ended up kind of down and out in a sense? How did it go sort of pear-shaped, if one can put it that way, right? And there's a reason to that, and the reason I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler here. The reason is his psychology, his beliefs, the things that start interesting him. What do you call it? The belief system that he sort of adopts. It's not just that. It's also the things that he feels inspired by start to redirect his life. And so he becomes incredibly idealistic. And so instead of becoming materialistic, he's kind of surrounded by a world that is becoming materialistic. He kind of goes in the opposite direction. And this is something you definitely see, certainly you see in places like Africa, when a country becomes developed. In other words, when a country transitions from being a undeveloped country to a developed country, some people are able to make that transition, like Theo van Gogh. And some people try to make that transition or partially make that transition, and then for whatever reason, they don't. And that could be many different reasons. It could be they have a very traditional sort of mindset or heart or whatever. But the fact is that you can have sometimes countries that struggle to make the transition from an undeveloped country to a developed country, right? And so I don't want to talk too much about that, but in that process where a country goes from undeveloped to developed, you can see people becoming very rich, right? So people who go into mining, or they learn how to build railways, or they do this or that, they can become very rich, and they can kind of become monopolists in certain areas. And while other people can become very poor, as suddenly things that you thought were awesome jobs don't really make any money. So maybe you were a candle maker once upon a time, and your father before you was also a candle maker, and the one before you as well. But suddenly we don't really need candles that much, or whatever it is. Or you were a wood carver, and now they've found machines that carve wood, right? I'm just saying certain sort of really skillful things that would take a lot of time in the past. Now, thanks to industrialization and to some extent machines can kind of take over some of those jobs. And if you don't change with the changing things, you can get sort of left behind. I think quite a good example in the current era that we're in right now, like a modern example, is somebody who wants to, say, write books for a living. And I was one of them. I'm not saying that you can't make a success, because I did make a success, but I had to work incredibly hard. But the other thing that I had to look at was, do you transition to YouTube or not, right? And it was quite important that I did transition to YouTube. Part of the reason why I didn't want to go into YouTube was I thought, do people who read, do the people who I want to engage, are they kind of on YouTube, or aren't they sort of somewhere else reading? That was just kind of the thought process. And it was important for me to recognize that YouTube was a major way of engaging with an audience as well, right? even if you see it as social media, much better than Facebook kind of thing. So all I'm trying to say is sometimes you've got to be flexible and adapt in a changing world. And if you don't, you can actually end up very poor. And the problem isn't that you're stupid or that you don't have a work ethic or that you or that you're unteachable, or that there's not something lacking there. The problem may simply be that you didn't adapt. Something was in your face, something was sort of crossing your path, and you needed to adapt to that, and you didn't. And if you had, things could have been different. That's kind of my point. And one wonders whether one can make that argument with Van Gogh. Did he adapt enough? Right? Or you could even argue that his art was ahead of its time. And so did the art public adapt fast enough to appreciate what was going on? So there's that way of looking at it as well. Anyway, so he says, will you ask Schmidt what the price of the album Caro, lithographs by Emile Vernier is? Somebody asked for it at the store, and I know they have it in Brussels. Next time I write, I'll send you my picture, which I had taken last Sunday. So yeah, he's actually talking about photography. Now, I don't know if you guys know, let me ask you guys this question. Let's check your knowledge. When do you think photography came kind of online? When do you think photography came online in the world? S.M. Kowalinsky says, Hegel said, those who don't read the signs of the times get trampled in history. Hi, Susan Becker, good to see you here. Stephanie says, curious, do most of you know Nick from his books or from his channel? Good question. Paddy says, lucky for us, Nick is on YouTube. Yoga Nand says, I watched YouTube for 8 months before learning how to sign in. Yeah, some of us, yeah, okay. Robbie Robbins says in the 1900s, a bit earlier than that. S.M. Kowalinsky says late 1800s. Stephanie says, I knew Nick from his books before YouTube. Stephanie's come definitely a long way with my narratives. Someone says 1897. Someone said 1890s. Okay, so it's actually around about 1850 where sort of modern photography starts its thing. And there's a fascinating story. I actually wrote a magazine article in Country Life about it, where they wanted to document the Victoria Falls for the first time in Africa. And it was kind of a race between a photographer and an artist. And when the photographer got there, his camera didn't work. It kind of had a technical fault. And so he wasn't actually able to snap the photo. And so Thomas Baines, I believe it was, I think I've got that right. Thomas Baines painted the Victoria Falls for the first time. So in other words, he got the upper hand from the photographer. Otherwise, the photographer would have gotten all the glory. Let me just see if I can share this with you. So it's kind of one of the few times that someone kind of, in an artist, sort of trumped the photography, and it's quite an incredible what do you call it? It was quite an incredible scoop. And there are still rare occasions where that happens today. For example, in trials where you're not allowed to take photos inside the courtroom, but you are allowed to sketch people in the courtroom because of certain legal constraints. So anyway, Thomas Baines painted that, and I think it is from think it's from around about 1850. Just trying to get clarity here. In 1858, Baines accompanied David Livingstone as one of the first white men to view the Victoria Falls. That was 1858. So that was just after sort of cameras were sort of coming online, right? So cameras were just starting to sort of enter the system. And so in Van Gogh's day, they were still trying to refine it. And this is why he's saying, I'm going to send you my, I think when he says, I'm going to send you my picture, he means I'm going to send you my photo. And as we know, there are very few photos of Van Gogh. And of course, he does many self-portraits, but he paints them, right? You can also imagine at that time how expensive a single photo is. And over the years, photography has become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And now we have the advent of digital photography where it doesn't really cost you anything to take a photo and put it online. In the past, you would take photos, print it out on film, and it would cost you quite a bit each time. So Nisi says, my mom's friend was a sketch artist in the 1980s. All they allowed, she was very busy. Okay. So this was also something that Van Gogh was dealing with, was the advent of photography during his lifetime, now of the machines and the engineering that was going on. So on the one hand, they're building the Eiffel Tower, they would be building the Titanic in like a decade or two after his death, but that's how far advanced things were coming along with in terms of ships. But one of the other machines that they were developing were, for example, the camera. And so part of that is influencing his art. For example, a telescope taking a photo of distant galaxies, which I think is represented in Starry Night, right? So it's not just that someone looks through a telescope and sees what they see. They are, for the first time, able to print these things in newspapers, and that's also part of the industrialization of the written word. You're now having things like comics and novels and books, and of course Van Gogh is a frenetic reader, but also things like newspapers. And Van Gogh was someone who read a lot, he was very literate, and he was also someone who wrote a lot. And you often have that connection. Writers read a lot and writers write a lot. I've yet to meet a writer that doesn't read a lot. It just doesn't work that way. When I was at school and I was known to get good high marks for my essays, other kids would come to me and say, what must I do to improve my essay writing? And I said, read a lot. Because one of the things reading teaches you is it expands your vocabulary. It expands your knowledge of, how to use sentences and what other people, how they use language. It just widens your kind of acumen in that area. Okay, so let's just look at, okay, so let's go back to the letter. And so he says, the next time I write, I'll send you my picture, which I had taken last Sunday. So you can imagine things like that is also quite amazing at that time. That the first time that photos are possible, right? It's like something completely new, where, it's a transition from someone always sketching your picture, and the pictures on walls are always sketched pictures, sketched portraits. And now for the first time ever, some of these pictures on walls are actually photographs of people, right? And you can imagine how that challenges the artist. The artist has kind of got to find a way to make a portrait more compelling. And isn't that what Van Gogh is trying to do? And so you can add certain elements like of symbolism to a portrait that a photo just doesn't capture. You can add more green and whatever to just imagine the portrait of Dr. Gachet as a photo of Dr. Gachet. Would you capture that sense of disturbance, that sense of whatever, if it was a photo? On the other hand, it would be great just to have a great photo of Van Gogh, a proper photo of him when he was an older dude, and just see what he looks like. There are some disputed photos of Van Gogh, but we'll get to that. Anyway, he says, have you already been to the Palace Ducal? I guess that's in Brussels. It says, don't fail to go there when you have a chance. So you already get a sense that Van Gogh is quite well traveled, he's quite streetwise, he's quite worldly wise, he's quite street smart, right? And then he says, well, boy, keep your courage up. All the friends send you their compliments and good wishes. Give my regards to Schmidt and Edward and write to me soon. Adieu, your loving brother Vincent. Then he says, you know my address is Lange Beestenmarkt 32 or Goupil and Co. Cie Plaats, right? And so it's quite interesting, this last paragraph there, he says, well, boy, keep your courage up. You see what he's doing is supporting his brother. And so all of this is kind of an investment. He doesn't know this, but it's an investment into his relationship with his brother that will later pay dividends when he needs his brother. And that time he would, that time would definitely come in the last months, arguably the last year or two of his life. And that his brother would really come through for him. And his brother would probably remember this period of support. So now we go on to the next letter, also written from The Hague, also written in January. This one's written January 28, 1873. Also from Vincent to Theo. Dear Theo, I was glad you answered me so soon and that you like Brussels and have found a nice boarding house. Don't lose heart if it is very difficult at times. Faticus, thanks a lot. Don't lose heart if it is very difficult at times. Everything will come out all right, and nobody can, in the beginning, do as he wishes. How I pity Uncle Hein. I heartily hope he will recover, but Theo, I fear he will not. So yeah, they've got a family member that is sick in some way. He says, last summer he was still full of enthusiasm and had so many plans and told me that business was flourishing. It's very sad. Last Sunday I was at Uncle Cor's. That's not the brother, that's I think his father's brother, and spent a very pleasant day there, as you can imagine, and saw so many beautiful things. As you know, Uncle has just come back from Paris and brought some beautiful pictures and drawings with him. I remained in Amsterdam till Monday morning and went to see the museums again. Do you know that they're going to build a large new museum in Amsterdam instead of the Trippenhuis? I think it is right, for the Trippenhuis is small and many pictures are hung so that they can hardly be seen. Now, what's so ironic about this is Vincent's writing about someone else that is ill. He's writing about being in Amsterdam and going to art galleries there. And the ironic thing is that today there's a Vincent van Gogh museum, a museum. I really don't know how many museums there are in the world dedicated to one artist. But anyway, you have the Van Gogh Museum today in Amsterdam, and it is incredibly popular. In fact, when I went to Amsterdam, I didn't really think about, well, I guess I did think about going to see Rembrandt and the other artists, but I ended up only having time to go to the Van Gogh Museum. And that shows you the tremendous power, drawing power of Van Gogh. And the other thing was you like struggled to get place. It was so popular. There were queues going in. The whole place was packed, and you had to sign up online. You couldn't just like pitch up there and go into the museum. You had to start queuing sort of online, where they would tell you if there was space available for the day that you wanted to go. And what shocked the heck out of me was when I tried to book, it was like that day full, that day full, that day full, that day full, that day full. And it was like, cheapers, I've come all the way here and I'm not going to be able to go to the Van Gogh Museum. And the weird thing was, I think I actually went to the museum and I said, can you guys please make an exception for me? Or I emailed them. I said, I've come all the way from South Africa. And they said, often these days that are full kind of space becomes available closer to the time. I'm not sure why that was. I don't know if like maybe busloads of tourists get lost somewhere, or a train or a plane flies the wrong way or something. But anyway, that did happen, and so I did manage to get a place. But I'm just saying, here he is talking about going to museums in Amsterdam, little knowing that there would be an entire museum devoted to him, which is incredible achievement. I really don't know if there's other art museums dedicated to a single artist. And you must think about why that might not be. And the answer is, how many artists produced the amount of work that he did? It's not just artwork, it's also letters, it's also his story. How many artists have the amount of history and intrigue and whatnot that Van Gogh has, like compared to some other artist? You've got to have the material to put together an exhibition that is 3-4 stories tall, and there are also books, and there's also this and there's also that. So anyway, he says, how I should have liked to see that picture by Claysenaar. I've only seen a few pictures of his, and those I like very much. Tell me if that other picture is by Alfred Stevens, or else what the first name is. I know the photograph after the Rota, and have even seen the picture at the exhibition in Brussels. What he's talking about here are a combination of photos, paintings, sometimes sketches. He says, be sure to let me know what pictures you see. I'm always glad to know. The album of which you gave me the title is not the one I meant, which is only lithographs after Corot. But I thank you for the trouble you have taken. I hope to get a letter from Sister Anna soon. She's rather laggard about writing of late. Now, he's kind of criticizing his Sister Anna for not writing much. What's quite interesting is he's talking about albums, and I guess it's albums with photos in it. When last did you look at a photo album? Today, when you think of albums, you kind of think of, well, do you think of albums on Facebook kind of thing? That's also kind of a bit of a antique for us these days. Stephanie says, I love to sketch. I love to sketch. It's something I would like to do again, definitely. Then he says to his brother, do surprise her, meaning Anna, with a letter. That would be such a pleasure to her. So here he is looking after his own family, saying, write a letter to your sister. She would appreciate that. He says, I suppose you are very busy, but that is not bad. It is cold here and they are skating already. I walk as much as I can. I wonder if you will have any chance to skate. Enclosed you will find my photograph, but if you write home, don't mention it. As you know, it is for Father's birthday. I've already sent you my congratulations upon that day. My best compliments to Uncle and Aunt, also to Mr. Schmidt and Edward, always your loving brother Vincent. Then he says, kind of as a postscript, kind regards from everybody at Honnebeeks, Aunt Fee and Ruiz. So this seems to be that he sent his photograph and he's going to give it to his father for his father's birthday. He's going to give his father a photograph of himself for his father's birthday. And so I don't know whether there's like multiple photos, like multiple prints of the same photo, and he's sending one to his brother and he's going to send another to his father. But he says, don't mention this to Dad because I'm going to give it to him for his birthday. Okay, so let's just have a look at some of your comments. Nisi says, close family is all I picture through these letters. That's why his N confuses me more. Very supportive family. Well, you're going to see that certain things happen that cause schisms in the family. So right now he's well off. Well, right now he's respected. Right now he's respectable. Because he's independent. Okay, so someone says they want to see Stephanie's sketches. So yeah, it would be good to see them. Okay, so now we go into the next letter. It's written about a month and a half later, also from The Hague, 17th March, 1873. Also Vincent to Theo. Dear Theo, it is time for you to hear from me again. I'm longing to hear how you and Uncle Hein are, so I hope that you will be able to find time to write to me. I suppose you have heard that I'm going to London, probably very soon. I do hope that we shall see each other before then. If there's any chance, I shall go to Halford at Easter, but that depends on Itterson, who is away on business. I cannot go away before he comes back. It will be quite a different life for me in London, as I shall probably have to live alone in rooms. I'll have to take care of many things I don't have to worry about now. I'm looking very much to seeing London, as you can imagine, but still I'm sorry to leave here. Now that it has been decided that I shall go away, I feel how strongly I'm attached to The Hague. Well, it can't be helped, and I intend not to take things too hard. It will be splendid for my English. I can understand it well enough. But I can't speak it as well as I would wish. So that's something else that people, I don't think, appreciate about Van Gogh is he spoke quite a few languages. He could speak Dutch, obviously, his native tongue. He could speak French. He could also speak English. I mean, he went and he lived in England, I think, 2 years. I think there may have been also a fourth language he could speak. That definitely shows an intelligent person, someone who can speak all these different languages and picks it up that quickly. He says, yeah, I understand it well enough, because he was also reading it. He was reading Charles Dickens and Sherlock Holmes and that sort of thing. He says, I heard from Anna that you had your picture taken. So you can see this is quite the rage, having a picture taken. He says, if you have one to spare, don't forget me. So saying, send one over to me. He says, how is Uncle Hein? Not better, I'm afraid. And how is Aunt? Can Uncle keep himself busy, and does he suffer much pain? Give him my warmest regards. I think of him so often. So something to kind of bear in mind is we are in, we may forget about it, but we are kind of in a pandemic scenario now where there's some uncertainty. Is something happening there? Are lives in danger here or there, whatever? Is there sort of health, alarms kind of going off? And for us, that's very unusual because we actually just so used to going about our lives and not really worrying about that. What this shows is in Vincent van Gogh's time, you could get an affliction and then you just don't really recover from it because medical science was one of the machines in that time that was kind of very young and very unsophisticated. They were just developing vaccines around this time as well, like for example, for rabies, which actually invented, I think, in Paris, if I've got my facts straight. So medicine was just starting to get on its feet in a proper way. But what I'm trying to get at is people being ill in that time. People didn't really expect to live much longer than, say, 40 years of age, right? Whereas today you expect to live easily twice that length of time, right? So I'm just saying there was a time where people really worried about their health, and you could easily not live if you were unlucky enough to catch a cold or catch some other mysterious ailment. We forget how far medical science has brought us today until something like this happens. I'm just saying there was a time that was a lot like this not that long ago, where you had to worry about your health, you had to worry about the limits of medicine, kind of thing. Stephanie says, yes, so sad. Life expectancy was short. Bear in mind, Theo dies at 34. Gogh dies at, I think, somewhere around the same. I don't know if any of the Van Gogh brothers lived over 40. Anyway, so he says, how is business? I think you must be rushed with work. We certainly are here. You must feel at home in the business by this time. How is your boarding house? Does it still please you? That's an important thing. Be sure to tell me more about the pictures you see. A fortnight ago, I was in Amsterdam to see an exhibition of the pictures that are going from here to Vienna. It was very interesting, and I'm curious to know what impression the Dutch artists will make in Vienna. I'm also curious to see the English painters. We see so little of them because almost everything remains in England. In London, Goupil has no gallery but sells only directly to art dealers. Uncle Vincent will be there at the end of this month, and I'm looking forward to hearing more particulars from him. The Hanebeeks and Aunt Fee always ask how you are and send you their best wishes. What delightful weather we are having! ! I enjoy it as much as I can. Last Sunday I went out boating with Willem. How I should have liked to stay here this summer, but we must take things as they are. And now adieu. Best wishes and write to me soon. Say goodbye for me to Uncle and Aunt, Mr. Schmidt and Edward. I am looking forward to Easter. Always your loving brother, Vincent. So I don't know if you picked this up. At this point, Vincent's only 19 years old, and look how eloquent, well-mannered, well-brought up he is, how considerate he is, how kind of sophisticated he is. I mean, how many 19-year-olds do you know that are fully employed, that are going to art galleries, that are going to exhibitions, that are, au fait with sort of international art, not just local art, but art from London, Paris, blah, blah, blah. He's a pretty impressive lad, right? Then he adds a PS. He says, Theo, I strongly advise you to smoke a pipe. It is a remedy for the blues, which I happen to have had now. And then let me read that again. Theo, I strongly advise you to smoke a pipe. It's a remedy for the blues, which I happen to have had now and then lately. I just received your letter. Many thanks. I like the photograph very much. Obviously, a photograph of his brother. He says, it is a good likeness. I will let you know as soon as I know something more about my going to Halford. It would be nice if you could come on the same day. Adieu. So here he's kind of giving his brother advice. You should smoke. It'll help you deal with kind of negative emotions, right? Let's just have a look at some of your comments here. Stephanie says, just like he had asked for his pipe when he lay dying, it comforted him. That's such a great observation. So awesome having such attentive students, interested members. It's just great. That's such an awesome observation. Amy Hall says, living close together back then didn't help either. It was easy to spread diseases. Another thing that didn't help was if the plumbing in your city wasn't great, if they didn't, if you had horses that were, you didn't have cars parked outside, you had horses parked outside, and then you've also got their feces, right? That's not going to be very good for health, kind of thing. And then also rats. By the way, Ivy kind of has made her, what's the word? She's a valued guest in this house. She's earning her keep. That's really what I'm looking for. I found the rear end of a mouse, quite a small rodent. So I found the tail and the hind legs, and that was it. So definitely Ivy has been doing her job. I do know there's been a little mouse scuttling around kind of my water tank. I've got a bag of birdseed that I haven't really been doing much with, and I think this mouse has found, what's the word, sakawa. It's just found nourishment through that. And so it's been scuttling around. I've actually seen it a couple of times. And I think because it was cold and because it was raining, the mouse decided to run the gauntlet and come inside with a schnauzer, which is trained originally to catch rodents and that sort of thing. And then a cat that is trying to use its skills, and apparently has now done so. Susan Becker says, smoking a pipe for the blues these days sure takes on a different image, definitely. Robbie Robbins says she has eaten the rest. It does seem that way. So, I don't know, quite amazingly also, the cat sat on my lap while I was narrating. I put up 2 chapters of an audiobook today, and she sat on my lap for the second half of the first one that I narrated, and because she so seldom sits on me, I was like, I'm not gonna disturb her. So I kind of had to scroll down using my left hand with the mouse, and yeah, so I kind of get the feeling that she's feeling quite happy. She's committed her little kill of a defenseless little mouse, and she's feeling really pleased with herself, and she can sleep soundly given what she's done with a full belly. Yeah. Okay. So that's that letter, and now we're going to move on to the 24th of March. I don't think... So this was a week after this letter, so just a week later. Not a very long letter, but he writes the following. This is from Vincent to Theo, dated 24 March 1873. The Hague, 24th March. I don't know why it says here 1875, but anyway, maybe a typo. Dear Theo, would you please find out if there is still a painting by Shortall in Brussels? It was sent from here on commission May 6, 1870. Perhaps Uncle has already sent it back to Paris. So the impression I kind of get here is that the brothers are now kind of doing business with one another, asking for artworks, sending artworks, sharing intel about artworks. And I kind of get the feeling, I don't know this for sure, but I kind of get the feeling Van Gogh got his break thanks to a family member, his uncle, that kind of got him the position at Goupil, and then kind of because they family, they were able to get these jobs, if that makes sense. It's like a family member looking out for another family member. Anyway, he says, if not, please have it returned here immediately, and that's italicized. He says, we have a chance of selling it, but it is urgent. Last summer, I saw it at your gallery, so I think it may still be there. Give my compliments to Uncle and Aunt, Mr. Schmidt and Edward. I suppose you have got my letter already. Adieu and best wishes, Vincent. So I'm going to put a link to... looks like I can't show you this, or can I? Oh, crap. I'm trying to show you the original, but it's not opening up. Let's see if this will work. That's also not working. Enlarge. It's not working either. Okay. What if I do this? Okay, there we go. So this is the actual writing. It's from a Goupil Cie letterhead. And yeah, you can actually see his handwriting. And you can see where he's underlined the word onmiddellik, which means immediately. Probably the Dutch is onmiddellik, which in Afrikaans is onmiddellik, but it means immediately. So here is a link to that if you want to look at it. I hope that link works. Yoganand, I'm not quite sure how to say that. Thanks a lot for that super chat. Scroll down with the mouse, yeah. Maybe that was why she was sitting by me. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, so yeah, Nisi says nepotism doesn't work. So it could have been nepotism. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. So quite a short letter and kind of a business, basically a business correspondence. So now another letter from May. So obviously April goes by and now it's the 5th of May, 1873. And Vincent writes to Theo, "You must forgive me for having forgotten your birthday. My best wishes. I hope this year will be a happy one for you and that you will like your work more and more. My time here is almost up. Next Saturday, I go home to say goodbye and then on to Paris on Sunday. I fear, however, that it will be Monday before I can start, that I shall have to stay over in Halford on Sunday. I hope that I shall be able to write to you when I'll be passing through Brussels in time. I may not be able to do so as I do not know for sure when I have to be in Paris." So I'm sure you know that in order to get from the Netherlands to Paris, you kind of go through Belgium. The Netherlands borders on Belgium and Belgium borders on France. So, on his way to Paris, he's thinking of visiting his brother kind of in person. He says, "I may not be able to, as I do not know for sure when I have to be in Paris." He also says, "How are uncle and aunt? Have they moved already? You must write me about this soon. My address is below." So this is how on the ball he is. He's already giving his brother his address in London. He says, "I'm writing in a hurry. As you can imagine, I'm very busy. Adieu, best wishes. Compliments to uncle, aunt, Mr. Schmidt and Eduard. Always your loving Vincent, V.W. van Gogh. Care of Messrs. Goupil Cie, 17 Southampton Street, Strand, London. P.S. Don't forget to write V.W. van Gogh, otherwise it might be confused with Uncle Vincent's mail. He is only called V, you know." So very great attention to detail, very conscientious, anticipating the future, very polite, and also, despite being extremely busy, he still has time to remember his brother's birthday, right? And that brings us to a letter dated 9th May 1873 from The Hague. "Dear Theo, Monday morning I leave Halford for Paris and shall pass Brussels at 2:07 p.m. Come to the station if you can. I should be so glad to see you." So what you see here is not a prelude, but you're seeing the way that Vincent makes time and goes out of his way as the older brother, as the busy man, to nevertheless, make space, make himself available for his younger brother. He's counseling his brother, he's supporting his brother, he's involving his brother, he's remembering his birthday, he's sending him a photo, he's asking his brother to send him a photo. They are engaged with one another. He's not too busy. He's not sort of partying somewhere and he's got a girlfriend and he's completely forgotten about his brother. You get the idea that he's working hard, that he's conscientious, that he still remembers his family. And even in the middle of this big move, this big kind of company transfer, he's also wanting to try and make time for his brother. So much so that he tells him, this is the time that I'll be in Brussels. He even knows that ahead of time. And can you try and meet me at the station at 2:07 p.m.? He says, I must not forget to tell you that I showed your photograph to Mrs. Teersteeg and she would like very much to have one. So now there's a lady who wants another photo of his brother. He says, is there a chance of your having another and sending it to me? If not now, maybe another time. Theo, you have no idea how kind everybody here is to me, and you can imagine how sorry I am to have to leave so many friends. Adieu, boy. Compliments to Uncle and Aunt. Hope to see you soon, Vincent. P.S. Inquire if you have to be at the North or the South Station. So he's really thinking about everything. The other thing that I think is really worth thinking about is, what if Vincent wasn't transferred to London? What if, for whatever reason, circumstances simply bypassed him and he never left this cocoon of warmth and safety that he was in? You know, what if he stayed where he was and continued to work in the way that he was working and in this safe place, surrounded by friends? He wasn't going to be alone. What would have happened? And I think the answer is he would not have gone on the adventure of a lifetime, right? He possibly would never become the artist that he went on to become. It's also possible he would have found happiness of a different kind. He may have found a wife. He was finding respectability. He may have found a wife, found children, not found children, had children. It's just quite an interesting thing. This was an important turning point in his journey, and he was going on it fearlessly and with quite a lot of confidence. You can see he's a confident young man. At this time, he's 20 years old. He's confident. He's also optimistic and worldly wise, right? One's also got to, I think, add that in a weird way, Theo is an analogy for Vincent not becoming an artist and just becoming almost an arms dealer, becoming an art dealer. Theo is an art dealer. He meets somebody and he dies at sort of 34 years of age. So was that the future that was waiting for Vincent? You know, was that going to be his story anyway, kind of thing? I think it's just quite interesting to think about. You must bear in mind that the art community at this time were folks that would drink a lot, that would go to brothels, that were quite sophisticated, but also were kind of quite hedonistic. And although they were moral in a certain sense, you know, they had strong family values, there was also this fun side that was nevertheless ruinous to health. And as a result, you know, you'd get syphilis and things like that. So if you imagine him not going on to become an artist, doesn't he still have this tragic ending? You know, it's like whether he turns left or he turns right, he kind of got the same fate waiting for him in a weird way. So now we are at, so it's a letter from Reverend Van Gogh. So I guess that is, Vincent's father, if I understand this correctly, to Theo, and it's sent from Zundert in 1873, 31st of May. We have had a nice letter from Vincent. He's living in the outskirts of London. And in the mornings at 8:30, he goes into the city in a little steamer, which takes him an hour. He dines in town and comes home at 7. His lodgings are quite expensive, but he doesn't yet know what his salary will be. So far, he likes it very well. And Uncle Cent has seen to it that he met some people. So I kind of get the feeling once again that there's some, I don't know if it's a kind of a family relative, Uncle Cent, or they're just calling him that as a, like it's kind of a term of politeness, calling someone an uncle. I don't know whether it's a blood relative or if it's just someone that they know. Anyway, I think at this point, his mother writes the following: "Let that be your greatest joy and care, then you will become clever and reliable and make yourself indispensable. And this way you will have chosen the best way to be spared from temptations that you will certainly meet just like any other boy. And you remain our crown and our honor and our joy, just like Vincent, who had great satisfaction. Aren't you glad he does so well? He had so much pleasure in Paris. He had dinner with the Calou family, and he found the interior of the gallery splendid. Who knows if you may not work there too, sometime in the future." So this is a portrait of a very well-to-do family, and everyone seems to be doing really, really well. Vincent they're proud of him. He's not only done himself proud in the Netherlands, he's now been transferred internationally. He couldn't be doing better. And they are now almost saying to their youngest son, don't be tempted. You're going to have temptations like any other boy. You remain our crown and honor and our joy, just like Vincent. And they're saying, we're proud of him. Make us proud of you as well. And what a ironic paragraph, given how the story ends. At this point, Vincent is he's like flying the flag for the whole family. He's really, the shining star of the family. He talks about, I think the mother's writing this saying, become clever and reliable and make yourself indispensable, blah, 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 blah. And so that is obviously what they thought Vincent had done. He'd become clever in terms of his business dealings. He was reliable, and he'd made himself so indispensable that he was now being transferred to start up an office in London. They go on to say, our Vincent wrote that he had bought a top hat. You cannot be in London without one. So that is the sort of ridiculous thing that is going on. If you go to London, you've got to have a top hat, otherwise you're not fashionable. And so you are in the biggest city in the world, and that is what is kind of going on. You probably can buy a bicycle with those big wheels, the big wheel and the little wheel, the penny farthing. Then there's a big jump to 2nd July 1873. Reverend Van Gogh to Theo. He says, Vincent gets £90, 1,080 guilders a year, yet he has to be economical because of the high cost of living there. His boarding house and his dinner cost him 890 guilders a year. So what that's showing you is that even early on, even though he's successful and doing quite well, the living cost in London was so high that he had to be disciplined. He had to be disciplined in his lifestyle. Then he says he's very happy with the firm. He's not quite used to his work yet, but the tone of his letters is one of satisfaction. Then it jumps to the 25th of August, 1873. Reverend Van Gogh to Theo. Vincent is doing well in London. We get cheerful letters. He has moved in order to live more economically, as his former boarding house became too expensive, and he had found a good one for 180 guilders a year less. Do you remember when he moved to Orvez, they suggested he stay somewhere? And then he said, no, I'll rather stay here. It's cheaper. Well, that's kind of a mirror to what is going on here. So now we deal with the London period, and it's a letter from Vincent van Gogh to Theo from London, dated the 13th of June, 1873. So it's quite a big jump here from the last time he wrote, which I think was May-ish, somewhere around May. So not that long, but a couple of weeks went by, and you can understand that there would be a bit of a gap. One could also anticipate that maybe he did meet his brother at the station, and so that sort of almost takes the place of letters in a sense, right? Sky says to stay at the Strand would have been extortionate, right, in the centre of West London. Definitely. So do you guys want me to carry on with this? We almost at 90 minutes. I kind of want to do London as its own sort of live, but I think London does go on for a while. Let me just make sure of that by period. London. Yeah, so London has got about twice as many letters as The Hague. So I guess I can read to you 3 or 4 letters. Do you guys want me to carry on, or would you rather leave London for next time? Robbie Robbins says yes, please. Nisi says whatever works for you. Sky says yes, please. Nisi says but yes. Stephanie says sure, whatever you want to stop, okay. Marcel van Skyke says yes, please. Stephanie says this has been lovely. Okay, so let me read just a couple of letters from London. Before we do, how many of you have been to London? How many of you have been to London? I've been to London. I lived in Maidenhead for about a year, and I lived in London for about 3 or 4 months. Anyone who hasn't been to London? Robbie Robbins says yes. Sky says I live just outside of London. Where do you live, Sky? Paddy says yes. Anyone who's not been? Stephanie's not been to London. Stephanie, your son's a rocket scientist, a robotics world champion. You're going to have to take him. Sky's in Essex, okay. Marcel van Skyke says, yes, I have, but just a visit. Okay. I was last in London, I think, 2013. That wasn't a terribly good trip, but that wasn't London's fault. Okay, so I was supposed to do Susan Becker says never been. I was supposed to do a presentation on climate change, of all things. I'd prepared a presentation. Nisi says traveled north to south. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Dear Theo, my address is care of Mrs. Goupil Cie, 17 Southampton Street, Strand, London. You must be eager to hear from me, so I will not keep you waiting any longer for a letter. I hear from home that you are living with Mr. Schmidt now and that father has been to see you. I certainly hope this will please you better than your former boarding house, and I'm sure it will. I am very anxious for a letter. Write me soon and tell me how you spend your day, etc. You must tell me especially what pictures you have seen lately, and also if any new etchings or lithographs have been published. Let me know as much as you can about these things, for I do not see much of them here, as it is only a wholesale house. Considering the circumstances, I'm doing pretty well. So far, the boarding house where I'm staying pleases me. There are also 3 German boarders who are very fond of music. They play the piano and sing, so we spend very pleasant evenings together. I'm not so busy here as I was in The Hague. I work only from 9 o'clock in the morning to 6 in the evening. Wow. That's, I'm not really very busy. I only work from 9 to 6, okay? And he says, and on Saturdays we close at 4 o'clock. I live in one of the suburbs of London where it is relatively quiet. It reminds me of Tilburg or some such place. I spent some very pleasant days in Paris, and as you can imagine, I enjoyed all the beautiful things I saw at the exhibition and in the Louvre. And and Luxembourg. The house in Paris is splendid and much bigger than I had thought, especially the one in the Place del Opera. Life is very expensive here, so this is definitely something that is not that is a bit of a struggle for him. He says, my accommodation alone costs me 18 shillings by week, washing accepted, and then I still have to take my dinner in the city. Last Sunday, I went to the country with Mr. Obach, my principal, to Box Hill. It is a high hill about 6 hours by road from London, partially chalky and overgrown with box, and on one side, a wood of high oak trees. So yeah, you can kind of feel the artist's eye coming out. Just think about the description there. High hill is about 6 hours by road from London, partially chalky and overgrown with box, and on one side, a wood of high oak trees. He notices these things. He notices the landscape. The country is beautiful here, quite different from Holland or Belgium. Everywhere you see charming parks with high trees and shrubs. Everyone is allowed to walk there. At Easter, I made an interesting excursion with the Germans, but these gentlemen spend a great deal of money, and I shall not go out with them in the future. So yeah, you kind of get a sense of, although he is successful in terms of how his family see him, he's already separated a little bit from his peers in that he's actually quite a cautious fellow. He's not living beyond his means. And so he's finding kind of these Germans to be, he can't quite keep up with them in terms of their expenses. And that shows you a mature person, someone who is able to, discipline themselves and, live within their means kind of thing. Robbie Robinson says he was good at budgeting. He says, I was glad to hear from home that Uncle Hein's health is good. Give him and aunt my best and tell them something about me. Give my compliments to Mr. Schmidt and Edward and write to me soon. Adieu, best wishes, Vincent. Now, I'm not sure whether, I seem to remember that Vincent spoke 4 languages. I'm not sure if the 4th language is German. As far as I know, it's Dutch, French, and English, but the 4th one may have been German. So that's the first letter. What is quite interesting is he doesn't write like short, vacuous, empty letters. They're quite meaningful. He shares real sentiments that he's experiencing. They are thoughtful, they're sensitive, they're personal. He asks about his brother, he asks about his family, and he tells a little bit about his own circumstances. He's not sugarcoating it. He's saying it is quite expensive here, but I'm enjoying this and I'm enjoying that, right? He's authentic, right? Now we go to 2nd July 1873. It's a letter from Vincent van Gogh to London, to the Hannebeek family, and I'm not quite sure whether it's a letter that was given to someone in London to take to The Hague. But anyway, it says the following. Dear friends, so he is writing to friends, right? He says, I should have liked to write sooner, and now I will not postpone it any longer. How are you? You kind of get the sense if he's writing to friends now, he might be missing them and also feeling a bit lonely. He may be missing friends in England, which I imagine he would be. He says, how are you? I heard that your house has been smartened up and that all is well with you. I hope very much you will drop me a line when you have a moment to spare. All is well with me. I see much that is new and beautiful, and I've been fortunate in finding a good boarding house, so that on the whole I feel quite at home already. Yet I do not forget The Hague and should very, very much like to spend an evening in the Poten and look in on you too. The business here is only a stockroom, and our work is quite different from what is in The Hague, but I shall probably get used to it. Doesn't that sound like a bit of resignation and a bit of a sense of this is not quite what he was doing in The Hague? In The Hague, it was like he was in a shop, and now he's in kind of like a warehouse scenario, right? And you kind of get the sense that it's a bit disappointing. The work is not as interesting. It's not keeping him as busy. It's not preoccupying him to the extent that it was. It's a bit of a less fun place that he's in, including work-wise. He does sound a bit disillusioned, right? So he says, I shall probably get used to it. Well, do you think he does? Because he doesn't he ends up leaving London. And he also ends up leaving the sort of whole art dealer thing. So you can tell here already that the adventure is starting, the wheels are starting to come off on this aspect of his adventure. Stephanie says it's not as stimulating an experience. Well, you can imagine it's totally different working in kind of like an art warehouse where, put it over there and okay, we'll put that on that truck. Then when you have people who are interested in the art come to buy it, slightly different. He says, at 6 o'clock, my work is already done for the day so that I have a nice bit of time for myself, which I spend pleasantly, taking walks, reading, and letter writing. Now, if you think about this, he's quite a well-behaved young man. He's 20 years old. What does he do when he's not working? He walks somewhere. He reads, right? And he writes letters. He sounds almost like the perfect son in a way. But what's missing from this narrative? Let me see what you guys say. What do you think's missing from this narrative? Robbie Robbins says maybe he's lonely. Yoga Nan says Vincent needs a dog. He could do with a dog, I think. Nisi, I think you've hit the hammer on the head, the nail on the head. I think he needs a woman. He needs a girlfriend. He needs to be having fun, kind of thing. Susan Becker, thanks a lot for that. So, and bear in mind, 20 years old then and 20 years old now is a little bit different. I'm not really sure how exactly it was different. I don't know if to what extent Victorian England was still part of the deal, but he's still kind of trying to build up his respectability. And so now he's got to start from scratch in London, right? He's staying in a boarding house. He doesn't have his own home. And he's got to build up his friendship circle as well. So all of that is going to take time. So I do think he was feeling lonely, and I also think he was missing that aspect. When is normal to meet a girlfriend, I don't know. But I would imagine being the son of a preacher, the idea would be that it would be proper to do so kind of later, right? And I don't think he wanted to actually wait that long, as we're going to see. Anyway, he says, the neighborhood where I live is quite beautiful and so quiet and intimate that you almost forget you're in London. In front of every house, there's a small garden with flowers or a few trees, and many houses are built very tastefully in a sort of Gothic style. Still, I have a good half hour's walk to get to the country. We have a piano in the sitting room, and there are also 3 Germans living here who are very fond of music, which is very pleasant. So it kind of sounds like he's getting along with the Germans, and that it's quite jovial. Anyway, he says, one of the finest sights I've seen is Rotten Row in Hyde Park, where hundreds of ladies and gentlemen ride on horseback. In all parts of the town, there are beautiful parks with a wealth of flowers, such as I've never seen anywhere else. Enclosed, I'm sending you a copy of a poem by Van Beers, which you possibly do not know. Our Elizabeth copied it for me on my last evening in Halford because she knew I thought so much of it. It is genuine Brabant, I thought you would read it with pleasure, and therefore I copied it for you. So a really well brought up chap, like he's writing a letter to his pals. He sends along a poem with it. He says, "It was very considerate of your sister Marie to send me the announcement. I long to hear something of the wedding, and I congratulate you all." So what's also happening are some of his friends are already getting married, right? And so he must be wondering, when is that going to sort of line up for him? Then anyway, he says, "Will you kindly let me have a list of your birthdays sometime? I did have one, but lost it." So you can kind of see his thinking of ways to maintain relationships, maintain contact, maintain connections, right? He's very considerate. He's very in touch, in tune with the people around him. With many people around him, he's got a network, whereas if you jump forward 18, now it's 17 years in time, by the time he's in Orvez, his network has really been reduced very much. Now his network is Theo. Theo is his lifeline and his network. Now his network is maybe Dr. Gachet. Now his network is maybe the family that he's staying with in that restaurant. He says, "And now goodbye. Remember me to everybody in the Poten, and good luck to you all. Excuse the bad handwriting. It is late and time to go to bed. Sleep well, Vincent." And then there's a poem here, and it reads as follows. It's the poem is originally, I think, in Dutch, de avondstond, which means the evening hour. And so I'm going to read the poem. "The toll of the curfew calling to prayer resounded lazily across the fields, which blissfully lay bathed in the gold of the evening sun. Right in front of him lay the village, with hills to the north and to the south, between whose ridges the sun, sinking in the west with a crimson blush, poured forth its whole wealth of colours and the magic of its rays. Now the little bell in the grey steeple, veiled in dark green, was silent. The brown sails of the mills on yonder height hung motionless. The foliage was still, and over the cottages little puffs of peat smoke, tinged with blue, rose so straight from the chimneys that they too seemed to hang motionless in the tingling air. After the sun's good-night kiss, it was as if this hamlet, this field, these hills, everything around, silent and grateful, once more recalled the richness and peace they had enjoyed before wrapping themselves in the cloak of evening dew to sleep. Further on, but just beside the narrow footpath, followed by the painter, the sudden loud peal of cheering met his ears. Swaying to and fro, a wagon came rumbling toward him, piled high with a harvest of buckwheat. Horse and freight were decked with fluttering ribbons and flowering branches. Children, each with a wreath of flowers around his little flaxen head, sat atop it, brandishing alder twigs, or raining down a shower of leaves and flowers. Whilst below, around the wagon, a crowd of servant lads and lasses leaped and sang, so as to startle the whole slumbering plain. Behind the shrubs, the silently smiling painter watched. The noisy throng wind its way along the bumpy road, and thus, pondering the calm and deep delight the soul. Read that again. And thus, pondering the calm and deep delight the soul savors in the country, or with his artist mind reconstructing in silent rapture the whole glorious scene of a short while ago, he came, without perceiving it himself, sauntering into the hamlet. In the west, the purple and yellow had already faded to grey, and in the east, quite close to the little church, the full copper-coloured disk of the moon, lightly shrouded in the haze of the gloaming, had risen when he entered the Swan, the inn where he was lodging. Jan van Beers, the pauper. So isn't that an incredible poem? that feels portentous in terms of Vincent's journey. This is a poem that means something to him, and it's a poem about a painter moving across a countryside, a beautiful countryside. And isn't that where he's destined to go? Isn't this where his heart is already disillusioned by London in some ways? And this is already how he's dreaming. He's dreaming again of the countryside. He's dreaming of a bright, vibrant countryside. And that is the countryside he eventually finds at the end of his life. Okay, so I'm going to read one more letter, and then that is it for London. And it's dated 20th of July, 1873. Bear in mind this would be midsummer. Dear Theo, thanks for your letter, which was very welcome. I'm glad you're doing well and that you like living with Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Orbach was very pleased to have met you. I hope that in future we shall do much business with each other. That picture of Linda's is very beautiful. As to the photo engravings, I've never seen them being made. I know a little about how they are done, but not enough to explain. At first, English art did not appeal to me. One must get used to it. But there are clever painters here, among others Mallet, who has painted the Huguenot, Ophelia, etc., of which I think you know the engravings. His things are beautiful. Then there is Bouton, whose Puritans Going to Church is our Galerie Photographique. Is in our Galerie Photographique. So it looks like part of Goupil's infrastructure is that they have photographic galleries already. They already are selling photography. And you can kind of imagine that there would be a demand for that, given the demand already for portraits between Vincent and his brother and so on. He says, I've seen wonderful things by him. Among the old painters, Constable was a landscape painter who lived about 30 years ago. He is splendid. His works remind me of Diaz and Dubigny. Now, Dubigny is an artist based in Auvers-sur-Oise, right? And so this is also harking to the very end of our story. Then there are Reynolds and Gainsborough, whose forte was very beautiful ladies' portraits, and Turner, whose engravings you must have seen. Well, I know who Turner is. Do you guys know the artwork of Turner, the English artist? Do you guys know Turner? J.M.W. Turner, Epic Art. Joseph Mallard William Turner. Definitely one of my favorite English artists. Epic art. So I'm going to put a link to Turner's Wikipedia page just so that you can see it if you're not familiar with it. You probably have seen it before without actually knowing it. Stephanie says, how does one write back to such letters and poetry? Well, just that comment makes me want to cry. Yeah, it is a good point. So he's seeing Turner's work and is obviously impressed by it and understandably. Then he says, some good French painters live here, including Tissot, of whose work there are several photographs in our Galerie Photographique, and Otto Weber and Heilbuth. The latter is at present painting exquisitely beautiful pictures in the manner of Linda. Sometime you must write me if there are any photographs of Wouter's work other than Hugo van der Gogh's and Mary of Burgundy. And if you know about any photographs of pictures by Laguet and de Bracquelier. I don't mean the elder Bracquelier, but I think a son of his who had 3 beautiful pictures called Antwerp, the School, and the Atlas at the last exhibition in Brussels. I am quite contented here. I walk a lot and the neighborhood where I live is quiet, pleasant, and fresh. I was really very lucky to find it. Still, I often think with regret of the delightful Sundays at Scheveningen and other things, but what's the use of worrying? So now I've got to tell you, earlier, I didn't actually know I was going to come across this, but earlier in this live, I spoke about getting lost when I was cycling to the coast at Scheveningen. I'll spell it for you. Well, let me put the name of this place. It's right along the coast, very short distance from Den Haag, from The Hague. And I went there twice. I didn't know the history around it. I was just like, I want to go to the coast. This was the quickest route to it. And so I ended up going where Van Gogh, I guess, went. Scheveningen, I think. Scheveningen. And I took a couple of photos there of my bicycle there, and it was quite atmospheric. So, yeah, he actually says he's feeling a sense of regret that he's missing these delightful Sundays in the Netherlands at Scheveningen and other things. And he says, but what's the use of worrying? So the fact that he's saying that I often think with regret. So in a way, you can tell that he's disappointed about his move from The Hague. He was happy there. He had friends there. He was doing well there. And he says, I think with regret of the delightful Sundays I had at Scheveningen. And he says other things. I don't know what he means by that. And then he says, what's the use of worrying? So it's almost like he's saying, it is bugging me, but I'm just trying to not let it bug me, kind of thing. But what I'm saying is you can see the wheels are already coming off, that he's not happy in his work anymore. He was happy. He was like a round peg in a round hole in The Hague. And although where he's staying in London is fine and the surroundings are fine, you can tell I don't think he's really enjoying his work, most of all. And he's probably feeling a little lost and dislocated, which is typical when you move to a foreign country, especially by yourself. Anyway, he says, thanks for what you wrote me about pictures. If you happen to see anything by Lagui, de Bracquelier, Voters, Maris, Tissot, George, Saul, Junt, Zyme or Mauve, you must not forget to tell me. Those are the painters I'm very fond of and whose work you'll probably see something of. Enclosed is a copy of the poem about the painter who entered the Swan, the inn where he was lodging, which I'm sure you remember. It is typical Brabant and I'm fond of it. Al copied it for me the last evening I was home. Al is a reference to Lies, an abbreviation for their sister Elizabeth. So Elizabeth actually sent him this poem, The Swan. He says, how I should like to have you here. What pleasant days we spent together at The Hague. I think so often of that walk on the Rijswijk Road when we drank milk at the mill after the rain. When we send back the pictures we have from you, I will send you a picture of that mill by Weissenbrug. Perhaps you remember him. His nickname is Mary Weiss. That Rijswijk Road holds memories for me which are perhaps the most beautiful I have. If we meet again, maybe we shall talk about them once more. And now, boy, I wish you well. Think of me from time to time and write me soon. It is such a delight to get a letter. Vincent. He's starting to look back already, yeah. Okay, so we had an hour 53. Must have went by pretty quickly for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to try and stick to this time schedule of not less than 90 minutes, but also not more than 2 hours. We'll try and get through 10 to 15 letters each episode. I think you'll agree that already we're getting a sense of Vincent's character that is pushing through the circumstances of his life where somebody else might have just accepted the situation he's in. He's pushing against it. He's feeling that he's missing a form of happiness. He's already feeling a kind of a sense of nostalgia, and he wants to escape his situation. He doesn't want to be in the situation he is. And this is why he is reaching out the way he is, why he's reading poems about faraway countrysides. And that's kind of what it's kind of like he's moved to this big city and he wants to not be in a city. And if you think about where he subsequently goes, he doesn't spend that much time in big cities. Sky says it's quite a lovely word despite its meaning. Melancholy. Stephanie says this session flew, Professor. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think if he did find a girlfriend or a kind of a community, things may have been a bit different. But he does actually do that in a sense that, in a way, takes him on an even worse journey with an even unhappier ending. We'll get to that soon enough. Nisi, thanks so much. Nisi says, thank you, Nick. This is so enjoyable. Made my Sunday even better. Very appreciated. Hello, Timmy and Ivy. Timmy's lying at my feet. I'm not going to pull him up like I did yesterday, but that is where he's sitting. Ivy, I'm not quite sure where she is, but probably sitting on my bed. But thank you so much for making it. As I said earlier, I'm going to ride the slump. You must have a look at my subscriber numbers. I think I'm at 86,770 something, and just watch it go down to under. So next, when you look again, maybe today or tomorrow, or a little bit later, it'll be 86,600. Because my subscribers are like, oh, this is Van Gogh, not interested. So just bear that in mind. But anyway, I really appreciate the super chats. I appreciate my members being here. I do want to provide my members with something to watch. You certainly didn't sign up to be members for nothing. So, and I also enjoy this. So, somebody said you shouldn't always be chasing the numbers. So I'm going to ride the slump. And I'm happy to ride it with you guys. It's also been a pleasure for me to go through this. I don't know about you, but sometimes reading his words are so touching that I feel almost reduced to tears. Just that you have this rich life and, a life that deserves happiness and deserves love and deserves joy. And yet it gets taken through such cruel turns. And as a result of that, or despite that, or in spite of that, we nevertheless are bequeathed through this incredible life that he lived, some incredible art that still speaks to us across time and space, still speaks to us now and enriches us. His story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the tragic and the triumphant, still speaks to us, all this time. And what we're dealing with is history, and it's something you can either plug into and absorb, or you can, pay attention to something else. But when you plug into something like this, you realize that there's so much history in places all around us that we simply just do not know about. And at any moment, a place, a moment can become so infused with meaning if you simply open yourself up to the history of what came before us, the things that led, the things that built up before we came along in this moment. There's so much that is unseen and invisible that is nevertheless, embedded in the timeline that came before ours, and it just gives one an incredible appreciation for the ordinary. So traveling through the Netherlands, traveling through France, even traveling through Portugal, when certain events took place there, it just makes you see things in a much richer way. You're not a tourist anymore, you're a time traveler, literally. Places just become filled with echoes and voices and meanings and so on. And it's a way to fill up the emptiness of the moment with not only the now, but the history of the now that goes on for so far. And it's really an incredible thing. So I'm going to stop here. Yogan, and I don't know how to say your name. Always good to always be good with your life. Nisi says life is good. It can be good. Stephanie says thank you to all watching and the members here and with us for this very special Van Gogh encore. This is kind of like bonus episodes. I still want to talk to you guys a little bit about Martin Bailey finding the gun, and I still actually meant to do a shared StreamYard with Stephanie, so maybe we'll still do that. Susan Becker says, I love to travel, really can keep you in the here and now also. Stephanie says, I'll pick him up tonight. I miss him so much. Okay, well, on that note, I'm going to let you guys get back to your families, your lives, your moments, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me on this little part of the journey, and probably we'll do it next Sunday around about the same time. We'll do episode 2 in this series. Thanks a lot for your attention. Thanks a lot for your interest. Thanks a lot for your comments, questions, and contributions. Wherever you are, enjoy the rest of your weekend and have a good week going forward. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.